Hey there, I'm Ari from the Tech Buyers Guru, and I've got another product review for you here on the channel today. This time around, I'm checking out the new P-ATX version 2 from SFF Time, a small Croatian-based boutique manufacturer of small form factor chassis. Now, it turns out that the founder of SFF Time reached out to me after seeing some of the other small form factor content on my channel, and he said he had a product that might appeal to some of my audience members. I told him I'd be happy to review this, but I won't do advertorials. That means I will not review a product and not reveal any of the problems with it. Now, there are a lot of other small form factor chassis manufacturers out there that don't really like my approach. Now, you can go through my catalog of reviews and see some of the small form factor cases that I've reviewed only one of from a particular manufacturer. That should be a clue to you that that manufacturer didn't like my review. And I told the founder of SFF Time that I would be completely honest in this review. It's a product that doesn't have a lot of exposure, and perhaps it deserves it, but it has to merit it. And that's what this review is all about. I'm going to build up an ITX system in this just like I have in all the other ITX chassis that I've reviewed this year, and I will tell you all about the experience as well as the performance. Now, based on the specs, it's hard not to be impressed by the P-ATX V2. It comes in at just 10 liters and yet can fit video cards of any length, including triple slot video cards, and can also fit CPU coolers up to 59 millimeters tall. Recently on the channel, I actually featured the ML08 chassis from Silverstone. Now, the ML08 is very similar in dimensions, just slightly larger at 12 liters, but it has one major drawback, and that is that it can't fit triple slot video cards, which are becoming increasingly popular these days as GPUs use more and more power. The P-ATX V2 can fit triple slot video cards and also has another trick up its sleeve, as you may have guessed from its name, P-ATX. It can actually fit an ATX motherboard, making it perhaps the smallest ATX chassis in the world. But in this review, I'm only going to be looking at it in terms of an ITX system, and I'll be using my ATX test bench that I've used for all my other ITX chassis reviews. If you're interested in seeing this chassis built up with an ATX motherboard, please post that down in the comments below, and I'll consider how many people have given me that feedback, and I may do an episode 2 of this review with a complete rebuild of this chassis using ATX motherboard, but for now, I am testing it as an ITX chassis against the other ITX chassis I've tested this year. So without further ado, let me give you a closer look at the P-ATX V2, and then I'll build it up and give you the benchmarks. So I'm going to go ahead and give you a quick 2-minute overview of the build process. First step, of course, is to remove the vented side panel, which reveals a spacious interior that is quite nicely laid out. I found it a bit odd that most of the screws are Phillips #1, so I couldn't use my trusty magnetic screwdriver. Instead, I used the small screwdriver I typically use for SSDs. This GPU bracket in the back is one of the weak points in the design because it doesn't hold the GPU that well. Likewise, this power supply bracket, which only holds the power supply from one edge, which you affix to the chassis with 3 small screws, as you can see here. And take note that I had to temporarily uninstall the pigtail here to gain access to the EPS connector on my motherboard, otherwise there was no clearance. Speaking of clearance, I knew that I'd have only 59 millimeters of clearance for my CPU cooler, so I went with the id Cooling IS60. According to my recent shootout, it is the most powerful cooler under 60 millimeters, but take note it does require ultra low profile RAM, so I went with my Vengeance LPX for this build. Here's the cooler installed, and here is my RTX 2080 Ti, which looks positively small in this case, proving that there is plenty of space for much larger GPUs should you have them. And this serves as a reminder that this case can actually fit ATX motherboards as well. But let me point out here a couple of screws that stick out the bottom of the case that truly necessitate that you do use the included stand. It is not optional if you're going to mount this vertically. Luckily, it's quite easy to install and uninstall. And note that SFF Time actually claims it also improves overall GPU temps due to that additional airflow underneath. With the stand attached, the system works out to 11 liters. All right, now we have the system built up. It's time to run the performance benchmarks, but I got to turn it on. Do you guys see the power button anywhere? Well, that's kind of a mystery. Oh yeah, it's underneath the system. Let's see. I think I can find it. This might be it. Let's see. All right, there we go. I got it turned on. So that's just a little reminder that this is not really a 10-liter chassis. It's an 11-liter chassis because you do need the stand underneath it for a number of reasons. With that out of the way, let's get into those performance benchmarks. So I'll start here with the idle benchmarks, and take note that we have a variety of setups. I have moved from a Ryzen 5 3600 to a Ryzen 7 4750G recently. And when it comes to my ITX case reviews, I actually choose to max out the CPU cooling for each case. I don't use the same cooler, and some people may take issue with that, but if I'm choosing to test a big ITX case that can fit a 240 millimeter all-in-one versus a slim case that can fit only a small low profile cooler, I'm going to go ahead and use the different coolers in the different cases to show their advantages and disadvantages. Here, the P-ATX V2 does have the advantage at idle because air coolers are quite quiet overall. It's using the id cooling IS60. It turns out to be the second quietest of the cases tested here, coming in just a little bit louder than the SG14, which had a 240 millimeter all-in-one, but really does a good job muffling the sound of that all-in-one cooler. Moving on to my CPU-Z stress test benchmark, which loads up the CPU and gets it nice and toasty, we find that the P-ATX V2 actually does pretty well here, hitting 70 degrees with a low-profile air cooler, coming in better than the Fantex Evolve Shift Air, which had a 120 millimeter all-in-one working to its advantage, and a lower-powered CPU as well with the Ryzen 5 3600. Overall, I'm very impressed with this outcome, given that there is no case cooling involved, no case fans at all. You're just relying on that low-profile air cooler, but it has tons of access to fresh air and does very well here. I'm also going to point out that at idle, the GPU is running silently, the fans are not on, and yet the temperatures are very different from case to case, which suggests that some of these are really suffering from a lot of heat buildup around the GPU, not allowing the air to flow away from that GPU. Even without any case airflow, without any case fans, the P-ATX V2 does pretty well in keeping that idle GPU cool. My final test is Battlefield 4 multiplayer. And here I'm using the RTX 2080 Ti, and some of these cases simply can't handle this GPU. The Fantex Evolve Shift Air, the Silverstone SG13, and yes, the Silverstone LDO3 Airflow. They are all way above 80 degrees. Take a look though at the P-ATX V2 at just 73 degrees, nearly as cool as Silverstone's SG14, which is about twice the volume. P-ATX V2 for the win here in terms of performance per liter. So in the end, what did I think of the new P-ATX V2 from SFF time? Well, I actually loved it. It's just so elegant. The design is perfect from a performance standpoint. I'm going to use this for my personal ITX build. With that said, there are 3 issues I would raise to any prospective buyer. Number 1, it's not a good chassis if you frequently have to move your PC around. I would not ship this by freight or put in an airline hold. The way that the GPU is mounted and held down by just a couple of bolts, and the way that the power supply is hung from one edge, just isn't secure. Now, I did express this concern to Yakov at SFF time, and he said he thinks the bolts will hold without shearing. My concern is my components. They're worth a lot more than this chassis, and I would not risk it, and I wouldn't recommend anyone else risk it either. If you need a mobile PC, this is not the chassis for you. Number 2 is the price. It comes in at $179 for the black version or $199 for this white version plus shipping, and the shipping to the US is $48 freight. It's going to differ based on where you're having it shipped to. These are all coming from Croatia. There are no other distribution centers. So of course, freight does cost money. I'm not taking issue with that. It's the base price of the chassis that has me a little bit concerned, and it does beg the question, well, what do you get when you're buying a boutique chassis? Are you getting value or are you getting something unique? Well, I think it's more you're getting something unique. And while this certainly has value because it performs well, the quality of the chassis wasn't really up to the premium chassis that I've tested in this price range. I thought the heavy gauge steel was a little bit rough. The paint job was just okay, and there were a couple of bends in the grille at the top and bottom that may have happened during shipment, maybe they happened during manufacturing, maybe I did it during my handling and building of the system, but no matter what, it does show that this is susceptible to getting slight bends and dents up here. The side panels and the front are much heavier gauge and won't bend, but the top and bottom grille are a little bit thinner, and I could see that they could bend pretty easily. Now, my third concern is that there is no dust filtration. That's not really an issue for me. I don't mind that so much. I think that's a fair trade-off for the great performance on tap, but some people are concerned about dust, and this will not filter any dust out. If you're in a dusty environment, it's going to fill with dust. Now, I do take issue with some YouTubers out there who test all their ITX chassis without the included filters. I think this is unfair to you and unfair to the manufacturers that include those filters. Filters cost money. They add to the price. And sure, they may cut down on performance, but they are a feature that people want to pay for. They cut down not only on dust, but noise. And I could tell that this was very different from a lot of other chassis I've tested. There is no noise suppression whatsoever. That's of more concern to me, but hey, it's on me to choose components that are quiet. But there's nothing about this case that's going to make up for the fact that you've chosen loud components. For instance, I had never noticed that the id Cooling IS60's fan is really kind of rough sounding. In previous chassis, I just wouldn't be as close to the fan, or there'd be a filter between me and the fan. I wouldn't have noticed it. I totally noticed it here. I also noticed that my power supply doesn't stop at idle. That usually isn't a concern when a power supply is buried inside of a chassis, but it's just hanging right out here near my ear so I could hear it. So ultimately, this is a choice you have to make, and I tested this exactly how it came. I think it's great from a performance standpoint, but there are always trade-offs. And the reason this got so far ahead of some of the other chassis I've tested is because it doesn't have that dust filtration. I want to make that clear. So it depends what your priority is. If you want performance, this is the one. If you want noise suppression and dust filtration, this isn't the one. It's as clear as day. Now, with that said, I do love this chassis, and I'm very excited that SFF Time did provide this sample. If you have any questions about it, if you're a prospective buyer, if you have it in your hands, you can't figure out how to build it, please post them down below. I'll be sure to get back to you. And for a short time, about a month, we're going to have a $15 discount on this white version, bringing the price down to $184, plus shipping, of course. So go check that code out if you're interested in buying it. And if there are a lot of buyers and SFF Time sees a lot of new sales, perhaps we'll be able to get some more codes out for you in the future. This one's going to last a month from the publication of this video. And with that, I'm just really excited I got to test this. You know, there's so many new cases on the ITX market, and I can't handle them all, but I'll get the ones I can, and I'll give you those reviews to give you another perspective. Putting together this content, it's kind of niche out there. I want to see that people are interested in it and want to see more of it. So please go ahead and do like and subscribe. If you want to support the channel, another thing you can do is use my affiliate links in the video description. So I will link these components down below so you can go ahead and buy these recommended parts, the ones I used in this build. As always, I'm Ari from the Tech Buyers Guru, and I'll catch you next time.